What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of HR Heretics. All right, Jared Fliesler, I'm stoked to have you on, and I want to give the audience like a little bit of your eclectic background. You were a growth hacker earlier in your career before growth hacker was actually a term. You were on the exec team of Slide, which was acquired by Google. You became a general partner in venture before joining Scribd as COO. Now you run a founder coaching business where you're a cross between advisor, pseudo board member, and coach with testimonials from the tech legends like Keith Raboy, Max Levchin, and Jack Abraham. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so I want to start with the radical performance review process that you ran at Scribd. Can you tell our audience about it?
So a little bit of context here. I went and worked at Google after they acquired Slide. And so I got this up close and personal view of what is arguably the most thorough and longest process for running performance reviews that they call.
Some would say worst.
Some would say worst. There are basically a massive trade-off that they've decided to make between speed and precision. So on the upside, they get the most rigorous feedback that I've ever seen and arguably the fairest rewards. On the downside, it is literally months of lost productivity where you go to talk to people and their calendars are blocked for doing this crazy perf process. And so when I joined Scribd, we had 100 employees. They had tried a bunch of different approaches to performance review processes and basically given up on it and gone back and forth. And as we grew the team, the process got heavier and heavier and heavier as we were just trying to get people feedback and figure out how to do the right thing and how to reward them. So we decided, in a fun way to blow up the process. And there were three things that I really wanted to focus on that I think are kind of universal for people that are running these teams and trying to figure out a solution. The first is, we wanted to get helpful, accurate feedback to employees. We wanted to be fair and consistent with it. And we were trying to magically do that while avoiding the massive drag and loss of productivity, which seemed kind of impossible at the time. And I think one of the things that people don't really think about around performance reviews, especially if you're not in the people org, is that this is serialized. You can't really write a manager's assessment if you haven't read any of the feedback that you've gotten from peers or a self-assessment or upward feedback. And so you have to do this in stages where you have self, peer, and upward. Then you have your manager assessment. Then you might want to do some calibration to make sure that one manager and another manager are thinking about this in the same way. And then after all of that is done, you figure out rewards if you're going to link that to promotions or raises or bonuses or anything like that. So even if you just spent a week on each of those things, which most people would consider extremely fast, it would take you a month to do the process before you even deliver a review. And what I've noticed is that founders and executives focus on that drag, and that's fair. Nobody loves this process. I've never met a person who says, wow, it's great, I can't wait, it's performance reviews. And so you end up in this push, company after company that I see, to reduce the process, but somehow magically get fair, representative feedback and do the rewards without really doing the work that's involved to get there. So we took a totally different approach. And I will caveat this by saying, I think the only reason that I could do this was that I was the COO. And so it's a little unfair, but I think that if it's HR leaders that are listening to this, it's really about getting on board and partnering with the leaders of the company in order to do this. And it makes sense when you stop and you think about it. So I had about 10 reports. That was pretty standard for our senior managers. And my approach was to block off the day, write all of my peer reviews all the same day. And then I would block off another day or two to read all of the reports and reviews and feedback that my reports had done. So their self-assessments, the reviews that their peers had written. And then I would just power through it and write all of my reviews in a day or two. And I noticed as I talked to people that almost everybody did the same thing. So the challenge with that is that everyone is doing it at their own pace. And we decided to change this. Now, the result of that was that we created the fastest review process that I've ever seen. We got quality feedback that was fair without the pain of hundreds of employees doing this all at their own pace. And the key in this was to make sure everyone was doing it at the same time. So if you don't do this, it's kind of like telling people, I want everybody to take vacation during May versus saying, hey, the second week of May, we're going to close the company and everyone should take their vacation then. Makes sense, not a complicated solution. It's just not something anybody does. And so we actually shut down the company for a week. We capped our peer reviews. We canceled all of our meetings. We didn't ship anything for a week. And on Monday and Tuesday, we did all self peer manager reviews. And by end of day Tuesday, they were due and had to be done. On Wednesday and Thursday, we did all managerial reviews. And by the end of Thursday, those were done. And on Friday, our HR team looked at all the reviews, made sure everything was complete, did any follow-ups, filled in any holes. All employees were rated and put into performance review buckets. We had HR office hours throughout the week to answer any questions, help people if they're stuck. And we turned it into something fun. We had special lunches and snacks. We had a celebration at the end of the week. We were in it together, and we treated it like we were shipping a big release. We were shipping performance reviews. And then the following week, we did calibration. People got back to work. The HR team went through, came up with a budget, a reward plan. We notified the managers of raises and bonuses. And the following week, the managers started delivering their reviews. And so we took this process and we condensed it down by paying attention to what people were already doing and then just owning that and making it take a week instead of having people do that over the course of a month.
How did you get your CEO on board? Because like I get the efficiency of shutting down the company for a week to focus on this to go as fast as possible so there isn't this drag. But at the same time, like you have stopped business for the company. So like what did the CEO have to say about this?
Yeah, so this is why I said I recognize the privilege of being the COO who's responsible for the business operations and the outcomes of the business. But here's the caveat. If you look at your data and everyone knows that your company is essentially grinding to a halt in the last 5 years that you've been doing these performance reviews, proposing that it grinds to a halt for 1 week is a hell of a lot better than that it grinds to a halt for a month. And so it is contrarian and it is edgy and it is something that takes some consideration. But the reality is the trade-off of this 1 week is pretty good compared to the trade-off that you are silently making by having everybody do it at their own pace.
I love that, Jared. Like, so I was just reflecting as you were talking, and ever since I started my career, that's how I did my stuff. You know, because you're right. It would be like a 3-week process to do all these things, and people would do it intermittently, and it'd be kind of unorganized. And I've always blown through it. Like, I'm going to ingest all this, partly because I would forget, right? If you kind of do half of it, and then 4 days later, the other half, you're like, I'm gonna actually pay attention to this all at once, so I can reflect on it and not lose things. That's why I did it. But then it was all done in 3 days. So I never understood. People are like, well, I can't do it in 2 weeks. I'm like, that's just a discipline problem. That is on you. And you've basically stripped that away from everyone and not made it a problem because they have to do it like that. I love that because I do think it is possible. And the business has always complained 2 weeks isn't enough. It's like, well, it is enough. It's just how you're working. And my other reflection was, you know, Nolan, you said you're basically shutting down the business to do this. I think the difference for me, and I talk about this a lot with folks I work with, is that the people are the freaking business, right? You don't have a business unless you have great people that are doing well and getting rewarded for doing so. And so I think what you've done as a business leader is made this process a part of your business. It's like a business initiative. And you're totally right that we can't do it on our own, right? Like the business leader should be the mouthpiece of this. I think it changes the whole game.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned this idea that this is part of the business. And I also understand, you know, shutting down the business as in we're not shipping, we're not getting things out to customers. But there's a theme in how I think about people operations. And, you know, obviously I have a very different background than a lot of people that have worked in people operations, which is if you're not modeling this treating these different functions, whether it's recruiting or performance reviews or management or incentivizing your team as something core to your business, when these are the folks that are getting the most critical strategic work done, then there's something far more important that you need to fix in the business, right? And so it is about starting to think about that strategically. And if we can do this, like maybe if you flip that and you say it a different way and you say, hey, Nolan, I can guarantee you that in 1 week's time, we can put a jolt of energy and excitement and clarity into our organization. We can help the people that aren't performing to perform better, and we can reward the top performers and really make them feel excited about the work. You'd be like, hell yeah, sign me up, right? And that's effectively what you should be doing in a good process around this.
And it's our biggest cost. It's like, you know, this is our biggest cost in the whole company. Let's take a few days and pay attention to it and give it a boost.
Well, so okay, I get it, and I do think it's a utopian that I haven't heard described. What's been happening though in tech is the move away from performance reviews, right? So Square last year with Jack Dorsey was like, we're no longer doing this. Like this process doesn't make any sense. What's your take on the companies going like completely away from performance reviews?
Yeah, I think that it can work, but then you better have another system for getting feedback out on a regular basis. And I think the downside of this is that people don't think about the introverts and the quiet ones and the ones that don't have the skill set to do that within their population. They think about, oh, I've got a few loud people that feel really comfortable and unabashed about the feedback that they want to share. They have no problem. This should work for everyone. And you actually have to design around the middle. You have to think about, where are most of my people going to be? And then consider the edges. Sure, you've got these folks that you say, hey, no performance reviews, just give feedback regularly. No need to wait for the performance review process. Those people are fine. They're happy to volunteer feedback, sometimes too often. Then you've got people at the other end who go, oh, well, if I'm never given permission and I'm never given a space and no one's here to help me in doing this, I'm just not going to share what I think. And that's a lot of people. So as long as you can design a system that helps those people to make sure their feedback is heard, then that's fine. And then you are designing for the middle as well, where you're like, okay, these are people somewhere in the middle. So if you don't have a solution for that, going and getting rid of something that works to help those people is probably a mistake. If you have an alternative solution, great. I think you should constantly be testing and figuring out what works. But I think there's this mistake people make where we do the same thing when we treat our customers like they're us, right? Like they know our product as well as we do and they're experts and they're pros on it. It's like, no, they're not, right? So like understand your customer. And this is your internal product, right? So understand your internal customer and make sure you're meeting their needs. If not, you are going to be building in this feedback vacuum where you're only hearing from the vocal minority. And I think that's a huge mistake.
Yeah, Nolan, I think it's like the baby out with the bathwater. Like I get getting rid of reviews, right? But I think the danger is the semantics. Getting rid of reviews is different than getting rid of what's necessary, is the feedback and all the things Jared's talking about. So I think we get wrapped up in like the old ways of what that word means. It's kind of like when Chamath on the All In podcast said, get rid of HR. It's like, that's great, but that work has to go somewhere. And that's fine if you want to put the work somewhere, but you can't just say, get rid of HR, get rid of reviews, because what actually is important underneath that shitty term that we all have our own biases, what we think about, is stuff that actually needs to be there.
Yeah. The thing for me is I think it's still in the oven. Like I'm still thinking about different ways to do this. I love your take on it, Jared, because it is unique and it is contrarian. And I think the problem with reviews as they've been up to this point is like everyone basically does it the same way with like very slight variations. And that's what drives everybody crazy. And so, Jared, the thing that you said is testing. We like to use the term experimenting on the show. And I think like just the more experimentation here is what's interesting. And so like stuff like yours is interesting. Also stuff like Square's is interesting. Like I wonder if they don't replace it with anything, what happens? Like what maybe the culture does shift negatively or positively. I think it's still in the oven. We're still in the early days of toying with this, but I'm very happy now that people are actually trying new things and no longer just like rinsing and repeating what's been done before. Let's move on to, I want to talk about founder mode. So Paul Graham had the seminal piece, about Brian Chesky coming in and doing founder mode. It is all the rage right now. What is your take on founder mode?
There's a popular divisive narrative that things like this are black and white, that you're either in founder mode or in manager mode. And I think the reality is that sometimes you should drive the car, other times you should be the passenger, and other times you should get in a different car and focus on problems where you can have a bigger impact. So founder mode has a lot of merit to it. Obviously, founders have started these companies and they have this secret sauce and desire and mission and passion about it. And that's so much of the magic that makes the company successful in the early days. And the concept could easily be weaponized to justify micromanaging an entire organization, which would just be a path towards failure. So there's three things that I think about around founder mode. And to be honest, this is much broader. Whenever you're thinking about borrowing someone else's idea or something that worked at another company, I think you have to consider that companies are not the same. What works at one isn't going to work at another. If you have 10 employees that are working remotely and another company that came up with this where it worked has 200 people working in offices, they have different needs, different friction points, and different approaches that are going to work with that. The second is that founders come in all shapes and sizes. And as amazing and talented as a person is, they're not Steve Jobs. They're not Brian Chesky. Those are outlier individuals. They are their own thing. And so you've got to be honest with yourself about what you're great at, and you need to lean into that. If you think you're better than everyone on your team, you're either lying to yourself or you should recruit a better team. And then lastly, there's a nuance in getting these novel concepts to work. So, when you think about founder mode, one of the most important things is knowing when to get involved versus not. If you're involved in everything, you can't scale. There was a reason you went out and hired executives to begin with, right? It wasn't because you had unlimited time. Otherwise, you would just keep doing it. If it was working so well, you started in founder mode. Most people left founder mode because they ran out of time. They had to hire other people. And then at some point, their mindset shifted. So actually, they didn't leave founder mode at first. They hired other people and they stayed in founder mode. And then somebody told them, hey, you should really take your hands off the reins. Now, if they just completely take their hands off the reins and they're not involved, there's no checks, there's no balances, and there tends to be a lack of cohesion across their functions because they tend to hire functional experts. So people need to be mindful of this, right? You've got to be involved in the places where you can add value. And your job as a CEO is to keep setting that vision and to keep uniting those different teams and those functions to make sure they're going towards the same objective. But this viral spread of founder mode reminds me of what happened with Netflix's novel idea to get rid of a set vacation day policy. And it actually speaks to all the same things, and I lived through this, right? I've been at multiple companies that have had this. So one, companies aren't all the same. When you think about when Netflix did this and they changed their policy to be unlimited, they were relentlessly focused on talent density, right? They paid people top of market. They were incredibly good at firing people, right? So when you think about this, there are so many different failure cases. And one of those is, well, what happens if people just take unlimited vacation and they don't carry their weight? Well, at Netflix, they had a control for that. They would fire people. And when you think of it, that's actually quite unusual. Compared to Netflix, most companies, I know you guys had Patty McCord on, and she talked about this. She said, most companies care more about retaining employees than managing them out. They think about that as this success metric, and it's a major problem if their churn is too high, right? So the pain of documenting and managing a person out and finding a replacement is just so high that people avoid it. And that's for replacing underperformers, whereas Netflix famously wanted to replace adequate performers. They said, even if you're just meeting expectations, if you're not exceeding, then they want to get rid of you. That second piece about founders differing. Reed Hastings was an incredible founder. He navigated through so many different pivots in that business, and he was developing this culture of transparency. So if people felt that they were going to burn out, like they didn't have permission to take vacation, he was pretty sure that he was going to be able to hear about it. And what many people don't know is Reed took a ton of vacation himself, which I rarely ever see when I look at founders today. And lastly, there's this nuance in getting it right. So have you guys read No Rules Rules?
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing book. So this is this story of how Netflix shaped their culture, and it's really incredible. There's a detail in this that didn't quite follow the telephone game of this vacation policy taking off, which is Reed and Patty thought it was so important for them to model taking vacation. So they told all of their leaders, you have to take vacation, and when you come back, scream it from the hilltops, share your photos, tell everybody how great your vacation is. You have to model this so that people have permission and that they know they can do this. So you can't just copy and paste this into your organization, not do any of the critical supportive things, and expect that you're going to be the exact same, have the same strengths and weaknesses as these other founders. You've got to pay attention to the details and make it work. And if it's a bad call, you have to have the courage to kill it.
Hey everyone, we'll be right back in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Real talk, most talent leaders haven't yet cracked how to leverage AI for meaningful impact on their hiring processes and business goals. But the leaders who are effectively using AI to transform their recruiting team's efficiency and quality use Metaview. Metaview is the AI assistant for the interview process. Their AI records and transcribes hiring conversations, like intakes, interviews, and debriefs, then provides perfectly summarized notes of everything that was discussed. That means your people can focus on creating human connections with candidates during calls and save time on the busy work of cleaning up notes after every interview. But it's so much more than just a time saver, because perfect notes means perfect data. For every candidate in every pipeline, hiring teams can make confident, informed decisions, and talent leaders can finally take control of the interview process. Join forward-thinking talent leaders at high-performing organizations like Brex, HelloFresh, and Quora, and check out Metaview. Head over to metaview.ai/heretics to talk to one of Metaview's product experts, or get started for free. You'll be up, running, and AI-enabled in minutes.
I love your take on businesses are different. One of the things that I have realized over time is it's not just, leadership differences. It's not just like stage and size differences. Like business models actually drive different sorts of business decisions and people decisions. If you work in a B2B SaaS company with margins that are in the 80 to 90% versus an operations company to where margins are much, much lower, it's just so radically different how businesses operate. And I think when people are designing people policies, I've made this comment before, everyone looks at Google and they go, oh, it's like, well, Google did this. And it turns out, it's the best monopoly of all time. They can do whatever the hell they want to do. And I think a lot of times people don't take into the consideration set, like what exactly does our business need and what can we allow given those needs?
Yeah, I thank you, Jared. That was great. That's my biggest fear about these things, whether it's the founder mode kind of taking off. And I feel like some of it's like a bad game of telephone now. And it's like gotten so far away from where it started. And we're going to actually have Ian on from Airbnb. And then Patty as well, right? Patty and I are close. We go back about 10 years. And one of the stories she always says is, I work with all these companies and they're like, your culture deck, I want to implement it here exactly how you had it. Like, make it happen. And she's like, bye, stop. Like, who are you? What is your business? What do you do? Like, all these things are important. And so I think this copy paste on these things that people say playbooks or best practice, it's just silly.
There is a revolt though happening on this like high level manager who only manages. And I think that's the essence of Paul Graham's piece, is that the person who operates in the ivory tower only and never gets to the lowest level of detail is the problem. Kelli, you and I were slacking this morning about my friend Tyler Hoag's piece, which we'll talk about next week on the show. But there's just this like, I think we've been coded to think like, oh, the person who you want to be is the exec. And the exec, what they do is they fly around at 70,000 feet. They only talk in terms of strategy. They never get to the lowest level of detail. They never talk to customers. And in fact, it's exactly the opposite for the most successful people. Yes, they can fly at 70,000 feet, but they also dive into the dirt to understand what's actually going on underneath the hood.
Yeah. And that's where I think execs
and that's the revolt.
Yeah, sorry, I agree. And that's where I think it's not just founders who need to be in this founder mode sometimes. To your point, it's everyone. Like, we joked about this a few weeks ago, Jared, when we talked about the founder mode, is that it's not black and white, which is exactly what you just said a few minutes ago. And we put the words together. I forgot what the word was. Fandiger, Mounder. But like, they go together and it depends. And that's every executive, not just the founders.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. When you hire amazing people that are great at a set of things, if you go and you put a muzzle on them and you say, but just do the work that I tell you and do it as I tell you it, and don't use your brain, just use your hand. I use this term of, if you treat people like wrists, meaning I imagine like hands floating in space and they're not connected to a body or a brain, they're just wrists that are doing work. You're missing out on a lot of opportunity with what that person has experienced. And there's a lot of valid things in that will inform and hopefully improve your business, right? You hired these people for a reason. Why did you take them through an interview if it was just about what they could execute? And so if you want their thinking in your organization, you got to figure out a way to enable that. And you're going to lose your best people if you don't give them any autonomy. Now, that said, this isn't about saying, hey, great, like I'll see you at the quarterly reviews. Good luck with Q1. You got to figure out a way to be in it with them and to decide, like, how do I play a role, a supporting role in partnering with them as a founder where I get the best of them and the best of me? And I just haven't seen that many people that are these professional managers in startups. Like, those people get turned out pretty quickly, right? People hate that in startups. And so this isn't a new concept. I mean, I agree. We shouldn't have people that are just professional managers that don't know what the hell is going on in the organization. But at some point of scaling, it was a long time ago that your head of engineering was the best engineer on your team. And so if they go in and they start correcting the code and they're actually a far worse engineer, you're making a mistake around that person's skill set. Now, if they help that engineer who's amazing at doing their work and has blinders on to understand how their work is connected to the rest of engineering, that's a really good thing for them to do. And they have to understand and be able to speak their language by being deep enough in it. And so it is finding this balance.
Yep. All right, let's transition to age. So Jared, Kelli and I were execs at an early age, and so were you. You were actually often the youngest person in your org to do the thing. So you were an exec at Slide at 25 years old. You were a director at Google at 26, a GP at a venture firm at 28. What was that like, and what did you learn from it, and what advice do you have for other young professionals?
Yeah, so it's one of these funny things where I think I spent most of my life where I was younger trying to be older. And now I turned 40 this year, and now I feel like, oh man, now I'm at this like magical number. I was wondering, like, is it old enough when I was 35 or, when I was 30? Am I adult now? Now if I tell people that I'm that old, and now that I'm 40, I'm like, yep, no, I'm at that point,
You're old now, correct?
Yeah, I have the same exact issue, Jared. I'm there. I'm going through it.
I officially made it, which comes with a whole set of other things that you got to deal with. But yeah, so it's really funny, being the youngest person around the table can really work against you. People are less likely to trust you. They're less likely to come work for you. They're less likely to follow you into the darkness. And I generally had less experience. And also this funny, naive thought that the people with more experience had it all figured out. And this was so clear for me when I joined Google. And I thought, well, man, this company has 60,000 people, make billions and billions of dollars. Like, they must have it all figured out. And then you look under the hood and you're like, oh, they're also trying to figure it out like the rest of us, right? Nobody really fully has it figured out. And the danger in thinking that way is that it creates friction on trusting your instinct and on pushing back and on trusting yourself, assuming that somebody else knows the right way. And so I think that is something that you have to tune into. The biggest mistake that I see young people make is actually to allow their pride to take over. Right. So it's when they rebel against this right way or against this experience. And, you can generally tell when ego is driving the conversation, and it's really off-putting, right? You just don't want to be in those conversations. And so I'm most inspired by these young founders and young leaders who lead with self-awareness, and they really listen, right? Like, they're trying to build trust and respect. And I'm inspired by that. Like, I see them comfortable stepping into vulnerability, knowing where to trust themselves. They own their mistakes. They learn quickly, and they don't get too far over their skis. And so one way that I think people can do this, and for a lot of your listeners, they're outside of this potentially, but they're dealing with it with a founder who's 25 years old. And they're like, man, I've got this founder who's really young, and how do they do this? And my recommendation there is building what I think about as a personal board. Right? These are trusted mentors and advisors that you develop a strong relationship with, who speak your language and will speak the truth to you. And the most important part of this is that they're people that you'll listen to, right? So that sounding board ends up being really critical because you're navigating this thin line between brilliant contrarian ideas and reactive company ending decisions, right? And you need some set of people that are going to say, hey, that sounds good, or pushes your thinking, or questions you and inquires, and helps you to get to a place where you don't have the experience to draw on it. So they're just helping you to think about it from other perspectives and to consider things that you haven't.
Yeah. Being young, often the youngest in the room. And to be honest, for me, it was like the youngest exec in the room and all the rest of them were usually men. So that was like a double whammy, which is interesting. But I think I would add to that, like, if you're young and have great EQ, it could be a really big advantage, right? I think you touched on this a little bit, Jared, right? Understanding the context of when you're in, reading the room, not being super aggressive or contrarian, like respecting kind of the background of things while pushing in the right way. And so having that unique balance, I think the EQ plus the young age can actually be really helpful because folks can often give you more leeway. They can sometimes trust you more. They can engage your curiosity and you can ask more questions. They'll want to help. And that's my experience as far as, being the youngest in the room. But I'm curious, do you have any kind of gritty stories of where that tripped you up? Did you step in to a big pile, when you were young that you learned from quickly?
Yeah, so one thing for me that was interesting is about a few months after I joined the executive team at Slide, we decided we were going to do layoffs. And I remember thinking, like, how do we do this? Like, what's the process? Do you get people in 2 rooms? Do you send out an email? Do you make an announcement? There's all these things that to consider. And we got in the room and our head of HR said, how many of you have done a layoff before? And I was with a bunch of what I viewed as very experienced, much older than me executives. And I was certain they were going to raise their hands and I was going to, listen to a master class on how to lay people off in the best way. And almost no one in the room had ever done it. So I realized in that moment, like, hey, yeah, I'm young and I'm inexperienced, but there's all sorts of areas that are new for each of us. And we actually did what reminds me of like Thomas Crown Affair, where there were all these different rooms and all these different conversations to try to do the best thing for employees, to try to be kind and considerate and understanding and supportive in how we were going to do this. And it's interesting to watch over the last 20 years in tech of people that have had to do layoffs and all these creative ways that they come up with it. And some people get praised for the thoughtfulness and other people, really get dragged through the mud for how they didn't have that thoughtfulness around it. So I just remember being in that moment and feeling so young and so naive and so inexperienced. And then having this reality check of, hey, it doesn't matter how old you are, you're going to run into those situations that are new to you. And every idea is a good idea. And then was an equal participant in designing how do we do this? And what is it that the employees are going to go through? And how do we show up as a company to support them?
Yeah. The thing that happened with me that I experienced a lot was I felt like everyone else around the table had all the answers. And it got me into this mode of, I need to have all the answers too. And that was exactly the wrong approach to take, it turns out. And in fact, like, as I have aged, I have learned that the smartest people say, I don't know, but here's how I'm going to go find out. And, that's the thing I would just encourage people who are young, who are entering leadership roles, who may be the youngest person around the table, is that don't get caught up in the ego trap of looking around at your peers and like, oh my God, they're so good at what they do. They know everything. They have all this experience. Like, I need to fake it till I make it. I think fake it till you make it is the worst advice that you could give somebody because it's inauthentic. It's a veneer. People will see through it and you will have to live in that body every day. And living in that body is so uncomfortable because you feel like you're going to get exposed.
Totally agree with that. I think this concept of getting comfortable listening and not knowing and being vulnerable in that, of going, oh man, I thought it was my job to know and I don't, but I'm going to do something about it, right? It's totally fine to not have the answer, but you do need to develop a plan, or you do need to have an idea, or you do need to say, I don't know, and I'm going to come back tomorrow with a plan. And I think people get so caught up in feeling this false urgency that they need to have the answer and it needs to be perfect. They need to have it right now. I'd much prefer that they go and think about it for a day and they come back. And it's like this thinking fast, thinking slow, right? So I do think people are getting more comfortable with this, but this whole puff up your chest and pretend like you have it all figured out, it's so see-through and people really don't realize it. And I couldn't agree more with you.
Jared, I have to ask you, just to pivot really quick, Nolan, the founders you coach, right? Your coaching practice now with founders, which is working with so many through the years. What's on their minds now? Obviously, without exposing too much, but what are the themes you're seeing as far as the anxieties they're feeling, what they're thinking about, what they feel good about? I just kind of want to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, so I have a really sort of strange coaching practice, pretty different from anything I've heard of. I mean, the reason I went into coaching was that I went looking for a coach and I didn't find anybody who had walked a mile in my shoes. I wanted somebody who had done what I did and was a little ahead of me and could be a thought partner, somebody that I would consider putting on my board or being a mentor or an advisor who could help me. And sure, some days it was, how do I manage my stress and communication and role play this with me? And other days it was, should we raise money and should I fire this VP and how should I think about recruiting this person and how do I get more out of this team? And, what do I do in this sticky situation, right? So it's all across the board. And I thought that founders probably just want somebody in their corner. and somebody who's not incented, somebody who's not at their company with territory and with things they're trying to protect that's coming in and influencing their ideas. So I thought, okay, how do I develop this coaching practice to be there for founders and be in it with them regardless of what they're up against? And so what I get exposed to is a really broad mix. I'd say one of the things that almost every founder runs up against if they're successful is that their role keeps changing. Every 6 to 12 months, the company's bigger, the things they're dealing with are different. They have more experts in the room. There's more of this, I used to be the smartest person at this, but now I hired a CFO and actually they're better at Excel and better at financials than I am. Should I just let them run the model? But they're kind of conservative. And I don't know, maybe I should push the ideas a little bit. This delicate dance of how do I get involved with people that know more and have more experience and are experts in this, but I have this magic sauce of context of this company and of all the mistakes that we've ever made. What is my role? And so you have imposter syndrome, and then you have this question of scale and focus. And that's really hard because you used to be able to know what was going on all across your company because you all fit at one table. And then you fit at 2 tables, and then you fit in 2 different rooms, and then 2 different buildings, and then in 2 different countries, right? And so you start to lose this context, and it's a little jarring for most founders, right? They want to know everything that's going on. They want to be involved. And if you cling too tightly to that, you end up micromanaging and actually stifling your company's speed and ability to run faster, right? And you end up squeezing these people that you hire, who you hired because they were so creative and so capable, but now you're constantly needing justification, needing to know everything that they're doing, versus finding a way to get the information that you need in a way that also works for them. So a big part of this is identity shifting. What happens for founders as they're changing? I do a lot of strategizing around fundraising and a lot of executive hiring and layoffs, right? So how do we message layoffs? When do we decide to do them? When do we pull the trigger? Something I know you guys are curious about talking through is getting better at hiring and better at firing. Almost every founder I talk to says that they fire too slowly, says that they wish that they would hire faster and fire faster and be more decisive around this. And so for many people, I'm a sounding board, right? I'm a second opinion where they go, okay, I'm thinking about this, but this is edgy. Should I tell this person to go, pound the pavement, or do I go with this? This is a big deal. Do I work on this big BD deal? It's really intoxicating. They're telling me they're going to pay me millions of dollars, but I think it's really distracting for the company. Hey, I have a co-founder dispute, and I think they might leave, or I don't know if I should still be in my role, right? These are really difficult things, and your board and investors can feel like your boss. And so you don't really have anyone to talk to. You can't talk to people in the company, right? And so that's where I think I have the most meaningful conversations, and hopefully can be the sounding board that help founders to get, I sometimes say CEO is around an acronym for me of conviction, execution, and outcomes. And so I think that that's my role. It's to help CEOs and founders think about this and to then execute to hopefully drive the outcomes that they're desiring.
Yep. You did mention hiring and firing, and I want to quickly touch on that. So you've worked for multiple companies that have gone through hyper growth. There's an aspect of competing and winning the talent as part of the recruiting process, but you just mentioned the thing that I know to be true as well, which is I think it's probably of the 1,000 managers that I've interviewed, 70% have told me that their biggest regret is moving too slow on terminations. So talk me through how you coach founders on both of those aspects.
So more broadly, we talked about how people operations and culture and hiring, firing, all this stuff, it sometimes gets bucketed into HR. And I think we have to be really careful about that, right? This is your internal product, and you got to have the same care and craftsmanship for it that you do with your external product. So you think about the kind of company you want to build, the kind of people you want to build it with, and then regularly share the why versus just the what. That's what helps your team stay aligned. That's what helps people understand what they're trying to achieve, so that in the thousands of micro decisions that never surface, that they never talk about, that they're understanding what they're going after and the trade-offs and making roughly consistent decisions as to what they would make if you had a conversation about it. So my guiding principle around this is hire with speed, fire with respect. And on hiring, if you see that it's hard for your recruiters to get interviews scheduled with your team, or that people aren't promptly putting things into your ATS, I'm sure none of you have experienced that, then your team isn't seeing recruiting as a top priority. And you've got to fix that. If you don't fix that, this is just going to be playing whack-a-mole. Every role that you go to hire for, you're going to go, come on, guys, like, we got to get these interviews scheduled. Let me go ask this permission. Okay, hey, you didn't put your feedback, like, you interviewed this person a week ago. We can't move forward. We don't know what to do, right? You have to enculture that this is a critical part of what you do. And instead of having the HR team take this on, you need to get your overall leadership team on board. They have to model this, right? If your executives think, well, I'm an executive, I'm too busy and I can't do this, they're just modeling to the rest of the team that it's totally fine to treat recruiting and hiring as this low priority thing, right? This is one of the most important things that you do as a company. So your employees are often going to follow your functional leaders. And if you want to avoid this us versus them that sometimes happens with HR, you've got to be in lockstep with your leaders so that HR is then seen as this strategic enabling function versus one that bogs people down with meetings and process. And I get that that's easier said than done, but that's what I think you have to work towards. On the firing side, I think there are two things that make companies fire too slowly. The first is fear of legal action. What if we get sued? What if we didn't do all the right documentation? How many times have you done all the right things and then still had issues come up? Still, only twice.
Yeah, twice.
I've had this happen a ton. It's funny. Every company I've worked at has had thoughts about whether or not, is it okay? Can we do this thing? Is it really okay to finally terminate this person? And in many cases, here come the lawsuits, here come the disputes, here come the settlements, right? And so that's when you do it all the right way. And what is the real underlying cost of that? And the second thing that causes this is a fear from the team about replacing the person. It took us forever to find this person. I really don't want to do that whole process all over again. So on the first part, this fear of legal action, I think it's actually worth looking at your true cost of a PIP and keeping someone who's underperforming on your team. Now, there's a balance in this. Obviously, you want to make sure you're not just firing every person where you get one complaint. But once you feel like, hey, this is somebody who's not performing, this is consistent, that it may be a mistake that now is when you start the performance improvement process and you just drag this out of having an underperforming person there. I suspect that you'll actually save money and improve your company performance and reduce legal actions by packaging people out. On the second, when you think about this fear of replacing a person, well, go back up to hiring, right? The better you get at hiring, the faster you can allay this fear, the quicker you can replace people that are actually going to be better suited for this role. And so these things are actually together. They need to be treated in lockstep. If you have a machine, if I told you could just replace a person, a lot of the fear of firing somebody would go away, but that means you need to get really, really good at hiring and you got to be able to move fast.
Yeah, I haven't personally experienced the legal thing outside of a couple times. I think that's honestly, if you do give people a package, which Kelly and I have actually been talking quite a bit about recently, one of my big learnings recently is that many companies actually don't give people a severance package when they terminate. And I think that does open you up to more legal risk. And one of the ways that I've thought about solving that problem is you give everybody a severance, small severance, and treat them the way that you want to be treated. And then that way you don't have to worry about that legal risk. But just on the hiring side, Jared, most companies are terrible at hiring. And there's very, very few that are good. And hiring, we say with interviews all the time, it's super performative. And so I think a lot of times you just have to be intellectually honest that even if you are serious about hiring and you have all of your shit together, that the reality is you're going to miss. And so the only thing that you can do is get really good at firing because it's just going to happen. And you have to solve those problems once they introduce themselves into the company.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about kind of the do everything right PIP route, Jared, versus the package route, et cetera. And we can do that another time. But you said something, fire with respect. And I think no matter what path you take or, whatnot, I do think that things backfire usually when for some reason, sometimes it's valid and sometimes it's not. That doesn't matter. But for whatever reason, the employee feels disrespected. And that's where I think a lot of times things backfire, no matter what path it is.
Yep. That's totally right, Kelly. All right, Jared, I want to hit one last topic with you. So in our prep call, we talked about the hedonic treadmill. And I actually think most people are unaware of this concept. So can you explain to folks what the Hedonic Treadmill is and how it shows up in your clients?
Sure. So the Hedonic Treadmill is a psychological theory that describes how people return to a relatively stable level of happiness after experiencing some change in their life or an event. And, when you give a great example of this is with cash rewards, and everybody has listening to this has probably experienced this. And you've probably experienced this yourself. So you give somebody a bonus or a raise, what you get is this bump. They're happy for a period of time. And then there's this decay. And they start to go back to whatever this baseline was before. And this principle doesn't actually just apply to rewards. It also applies to achievements. And this happens for both companies and for people. So a person thinks that they want to become a director, or they want to manage 5 people, or they want a process to run in under 10 seconds. Or a company says, I want to raise $20 million, or I want to get 1 million customers. I want to launch a second product. Doesn't take very long that you start to make progress towards that goal. And all of a sudden you set a new goal. And this is particularly true of ambitious people and ambitious companies, right? They tend to move the goalpost. And that means that you keep yourself in this perpetual feeling of not enoughness that comes from not yet achieving that thing that you desire. The greatest lie that people tell themselves is, I'll be happy when blank.
Right.
I'll be happy when I make $100,000. I'll be happy when I hit this certain level. I'll be happy when I get married. I'll be happy when I have kids. And then the hedonic treadmill kicks in. You hit that goal. You're happy for a period of time. Then you start to go, did I say 100? I don't know, maybe 120 would be a little bit better. Did I think kids would make me happy? I kind of miss my freedom. I kind of wish that I had a little bit more time to myself. That thing that I used to not like as much, now I kind of wish that I had it. So this is so destructive psychologically because it keeps you in this constant state of being just shy of happiness. So it's actually worse than just being depressed. You're constantly feeling like it's in your power and you're just failing. You just can't quite get there. It's just out of reach. And so there's an interesting study done by the Journal of Positive Psychology on people that focus on gratitude rather than financial or material achievements. And they reported that they had greater life satisfaction and reduced negative emotions. And unlike the satisfaction that comes from accumulating wealth, getting raises, accomplishing these goals, gratitude actually has a compounding positive effect on your mental health. So the more you're grateful, the more you think about what you have, the more you open yourself up to the realization of that. So I think we can learn from this to have a balance and a focus on both what we want and what we have, to take the time to celebrate what we've achieved, our customers, our impact. And we can do this as a company, we can do this individually, and to dream about what the future holds, to set aspirational goals, to try to maintain a healthy perspective, but to hold the dreams lightly. The minute that dreams become expectations, you'll sit in a place of not accomplishing your dreams and having that feel like failure. And instead, what you want is for dreams to stay as these amazing, beautiful dreams, knowing full well that you're not going to be able to accomplish all of them, but what a beautiful journey to be able to try.
Yep. It's so well said that gratitude is the hack to getting off of the hedonic treadmill. The other thing that I found really effective for me is just remembering where you came from. And, all of us have made so much progress. We've learned so much in our lives, but we never reflect back. We're always looking forward. And I know a lot of people believe in ripping off the rear view mirror. And for me, the rear view mirror has actually been really helpful in anchoring myself in we've come a long way. And I think other people, as I've talked to them about it too, when they do think about gratitude for what they have and where they came from, it appears to be the antidote to getting off the treadmill.
100%. It gives you perspective, right? And so there's a reason we do retros, the reason we do look backs and reflections, all of that helps you understand where you are. If you don't understand where you came from, you can't really appreciate the distance that you've traveled. And so I think that's incredibly important.
Yep. Jared, this was a blast. Thank you so much for the time, man.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you. So nice to be with you.
HR Heretics is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Econ 102, Moment of Zen, and Turpentine VC. Subscribe, 5 stars, share it on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, all the things.